Welcome to church this morning. Join us at moreandalliance.online.church. There you can participate in a live chat or have a private prayer chat with one of our online hosts. Thanks for joining us.
Are you hurting and broken within? Overwhelmed by the weight boundless grace. The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Here
Over the past few weeks, I've been really interested in old cartoons from like the early to mid 1900s. If you have a subscription to Disney Plus, you can see almost all of the works that Walt Disney and his team put out at the time. If you have the means, I would highly recommend you check them out. They're only like 8 to 9 minutes long, so they're good for a good coffee break during your day. Some of my favorites, of course, Steamboat Willie, which is all time. There's another one called The Grasshopper and the Ants, which I absolutely loved. One classic you can't see on Disney Plus, however, unfortunately, is Popeye. I think most of us know who Popeye is. Popeye was a sailor. He often had to ward off threats to his love interest named Olive Oyl, and they always got into some wild misadventure because of it. And often Popeye would resolve his issues by eating spinach. He'd break open a can and get overly buff and in some cartoony, wacky way essentially kind of just punch away his problems. And if you're like me, you probably saw this and wondered, like, why, right? Like, why of all foods that exist in the world, why they choose spinach as the one who gave it strength? Maybe there was some big conspiracy with, like, the grocery stores across America, or they're trying to make vegetables more cool for kids. But it turns out, spinach being the source of Popeye's power is based on a typo. In 1870, a chemist named Erich von Wolff was researching the health benefits of spinach, and when he was writing down the iron content, he accidentally put a decimal point 1 digit too far to the right. Instead of reporting that spinach had 3.5 grams of iron, he reported it had 35 grams, which would make spinach probably the same as a rare steak in terms of iron content. This typo wasn't actually widely realized until the 1930s, and by then Popeye was already guzzling down spinach by that point. Another time, sometime last year, while I was still looking for where I was going to be next and where I was going to be serving next, I saw a job posting at the college that I went to, and I was really excited about that opportunity. I thought it would be a great fit for it, so I started making my application. And my cover letter, I wrote about how much I loved the school and how much it shaped me, and why I thought this would be a great opportunity for me. And later that day, I saw a similar job posting for a rival school out in British Columbia. And at that point, for me, I was just kind of systematically applying for things, and I wasn't really giving a lot of thought. I was kind of like just shooting things out there and see what would stick. And so I applied to that one too, and it wasn't until the next day where I realized I definitely sent the rival school the cover letter talking about how much I loved the school I actually attended. I don't think I need to tell you this, but I'm still waiting for a phone call from them. While these are some like more silly examples, the point is that the words that we say matter. You probably recognize this in your own life as well. Maybe you got into an argument with a friend or a spouse over something that you regretted to say or that was misinterpreted, or maybe you're at the drive-thru and the person taking your coffee order misheard you for 2 sugars instead of 2 cream, and it totally threw off your entire morning. Or maybe you're like me and texting can sometimes be a source of anxiety because you only get to hear someone's words or read someone's words and not really get their tone or inflection of what they're saying. Our words have a lasting effect on those around us and the people that we influence. This week we're heading back into our Sermon on the Mount series. In these few chapters in Matthew, we see Jesus dismantling a lot of what was widely held as beliefs among the Jewish people at that time, and calls the audience to a different and usually higher standard. Back in April and May, Stafford talked to us about things like anger and how we're taught not simply just not to murder, but Jesus flipped that upside down and now calls us to deal with our anger we might have with someone so it doesn't interfere with not only our relationship with that person, but ultimately our relationship with God. We also looked at when Jesus spoke on adultery, and it's not enough just to not do the act, of course. We shouldn't be doing that, but we also need to create a safe network of people around you so that we can be free from a life full of secrets, and that helps ease the weight of the shame those secrets can bring. We took the month of June to focus on prayer and strengthening that spiritual discipline in our lives, and I hope it was encouraging for me, or for you as it was for me. But tonight we're going to be hopping right back into Jesus' sermon and talking about vows. In Matthew 5:33 to 36, Jesus says this. He's in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. He says this, "You have also heard that our ancestors were told, 'You must not break your vows. You must carry on the vow you make to the Lord.' But I say, do not make any vows. Do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And do not say by earth, because earth is his footstool. And do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black. Just say a simple yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one." So if I was in your position, and you're probably watching this in the comfort of your home, so I don't want to know the exact position you're watching this in, but if I was you, you might be thinking to yourself, Graham, there's a global pandemic going on. There's the largest civil rights movement in history happening right now. There's an incredibly divisive election that's brewing up just south of us that has consequences for us up here as well. And with all of this going on, murder hornets as well as a thing, with all of this going on, we're going to talk about our words. Here's the thing. If you're a Christian and you're watching this video right now, the words that you say are incredibly important. In fact, because of who we believe Jesus to be and the radical change that he has done and is continuing to do in us, the words that we say are incredibly important. For a lot of people, their only understanding of who Jesus is will come from how the people who claim to know him and by the words they use interact in their lives. We see this in full effect in the first sentence of this passage. Jesus quotes a familiar teaching for them saying, he says in the first part of this passage, "You must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord." The Pharisees and scribes taught this idea for generations, for ages. The Jewish people who learned under them saw them as people who held the keys to what true godly living looked like, and so they took what they said as truth. And that would be okay, only this teaching, the one that Jesus is quoting here, doesn't actually appear anywhere in the Old Testament. We see parts of the Old Testament that might have inspired this idea. There's Deuteronomy 6:13 that states when you take an oath, you must only use his name, or there's Leviticus 19:12 that says not bring shame on the name of your God by using it to swear falsely. It was out of laws like these that teaching like this evolved for the Pharisees and the scribes. So Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount here isn't necessarily going after Hebrew law, but against widely held beliefs that were based in false teaching, and instead brings out the real intention and the heart behind what was actually written by Moses in the Old Testament. When it came to the Old Testament laws that Moses recorded, its main intent is to protect the Israelites from being placed in a position where they're forced to lie. One of the greatest problems that Moses had to deal with was the tendency of people to lie to one another and deliberately say things that weren't true. It was getting to a point where Israel was descending into chaos because no one could trust what anyone was actually saying. Another intent behind this warning against oaths in the Old Testament was to reserve oaths for more serious matters. There was a tendency for a lot of people at the time to swear by things that were just for any kind of trivial matter. When you and your spouse are talking about maybe you want to paint the wall green, but you're not married to it, they would act almost literally as if they were. A big reason for this law back in the Old Testament was to reserve the times in which people took an oath for more serious matters, things that would carry heavy consequences for themselves or for someone else or for the nation as a whole of Israel. Ultimately, this law served as a reminder of the seriousness they should take their lives, as everything they did was under the eye of God, and every facet of their life should be lived for Him. And so now going back to the teaching of the Pharisees, Jesus quotes at the beginning of this passage we're focusing on today. The biggest difference in what Moses in the Old Testament commanded and what the Pharisees taught and the religious leaders of the day of Jesus' day was that there was a legalism in how they preached this command. Essentially, the Pharisees and the scribes narrowed it down to simply just to not commit perjury. The Pharisees essentially taught, make any kind of promises you want, whatever vows or anything you want to do, just as long as you don't perjure yourself, you're okay. Another thing that was crooked is how this law was taught at the time with a scale of what you swore to. And whatever you might swear to would gauge how serious your oath was. If you took an oath by the temple, that wasn't really that binding. But if you took an oath by the gold of the temple, that was binding. Or if you took an oath by the altar, that wasn't that serious. But if you swore by the gift that was on the altar, that was incredibly serious. This kind of teaching brought about the same actions the original law was trying to protect the people from in the first place. And it broke down a lot of trust. It's why when you're at Walmart or one of those big box stores and you try to buy something and it has that awful, really thick plastic garbage that is packaged with, is because eventually people kept stealing stuff and it broke down trust, and now we have to do an arm workout anytime we need to buy a walkie-talkie or something like that. One time I bought scissors and they came in that hard plastic, and I didn't know what to do. I needed the scissors to open the thing. We finally get to where what Jesus says on this issue. He says, "Do not make any vows. Do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And do not say by earth, because earth is his footstool. And do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not even say by your head, for you can't turn one of your hairs white or black. Just say a simple yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond that is from the evil one." We see Jesus warning against the use of swearing by him or anything else. Jesus lists a few things that were often sworn by. They can't swear by Jerusalem because the city belonged to God. They can't control it. And they can't swear by earth because God controls the earth. They can't have a say in that. We can't even control the color of our own hair, which some of you know the reality of more than others. But for some groups, this passage led them to refusing any kind of oath. Even when it comes to like courts of law, those kind of things. But the majority of us who are watching this right now, we probably have agreed to a lot of oaths in our own lives. For those of us who are married, you probably had some sort of ceremony where some legal documents were signed and that you guys were, legally together. And you likely signed a contract for your job, which outlined a list of duties that you're responsible for. If you're signed into a YouTube account watching this right now, you probably agreed to some terms of service that you probably didn't even read. So are these things wrong? Well, it kind of depends. God certainly saw value in oaths. He made ones with the Israelites in the Old Testament. That's what the whole Old Testament's based on, is an oath created by God and the Israelites. And Israelites such as Jacob and Joseph and Jonathan and a lot of others on special occasions created oaths for some serious matters. In the New Testament, we see apostles make oaths. In Paul in Romans 9:1, he says, "With Christ as my witness, I speak with utter truthfulness. My conscience and the Holy Spirit confirm it." We also see a really interesting argument made in Hebrews 6, where the author is assuring their audience that God has taken an oath on a matter that was concerning them. They said, God also bound himself with an oath, so that those who receive the promise could be perfectly sure that they would never change his mind. The author of Hebrews sees no issue in this as well. There are certain circumstances where oaths are a good thing, and they're customary at the time. With all this information in mind, the conclusion we can come to based on what we see from Scripture is that while oath-taking should be restricted a little bit, there are certain occasions when it's appropriate to do so. If you come faced with an arrangement that requires you to take some kind of commitment, and you agree knowing full well you won't be able to follow through, you're running to a high risk of hurting those you promised. That could in turn damage not only their relationship with you, but their relationship with the God that you claim to follow. If you're able and willing to do something, say yes. If you're unable and unwilling to do something, say no. Swearing by anything out of our power is dishonest. Here's what I suggest. If someone comes to you asking for something, maybe it's to attend an event or to donate to some cause, or maybe something with a lot higher consequences like giving a loan, or maybe talking with your spouse about having another child, I base, when I have these kind of opportunities given to me, not kids, but any kind of opportunity, I put them on a number between 1 to 10. Whenever an opportunity comes my way, I give it a number based on how much it excites me or interests me, or consequences that it might have if I decide not to do it, any risks that's involved, time commitment, all those kind of things. And I consider all these kind of things, and I assign it a number. If the thing lands at like a 9 or a 10, that's like an easy yes. I'm there. Those are things I really enjoy doing. That's like when I like to cook and reading, hanging out with certain people. Those also include more necessary things like my job, paying rent, getting a good night's sleep. Those are things that I love and need to make time for, and I'm happy to commit to them. And that also is the more serious and basic responsibilities I have. Things between 7 and 8, I certainly don't mind doing, and I enjoy them, but I wouldn't be devastated if they came off my plate. That can be anything from certain things I volunteer my time to, or some creative projects that I do in my spare time, to investments in friendships that, if I could use a several-month-old analogy, further into my right lane of friendships. This is where I need to be really careful, because these are things that I can commit to and end up saying not being able to follow through, and these are where I need to be most careful with. Anything I would rate 6 and under is something I'll usually say no to. And usually those things happen to involve being part of some kind of committee. But the obvious benefit to this is that it allows me to keep my time open to things and people that give me life and give me joy. And more directly related to our conversation, it keeps me more honest. Obviously, there's times in life where we need to do things we don't want to do, and as time goes on and priorities shift, things you maybe once considered to be a 9 in your life will slide down to a 7 or an 8. But the less times I put myself in situations where I want to lie, make up an excuse, or avoid the commitment I've made, it makes it a lot easier for my yes I wills to stay that way. Because our words matter. For those of us watching this who consider themselves to be Christians and believe that the Holy Spirit is working in us and through us, this means that we are in the presence of God wherever we go. And our word and our actions need to reflect that. As followers of Jesus, everything we do, every word that we say, holds importance. How we act shows others the Jesus that we believe in. Because if anyone knows anything about keeping promises, it's Jesus. Several chapters ahead in Matthew 17, Jesus tells his disciples, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but on the third day, he will be raised from the dead." Mark 9:31 states, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later, he will rise from the dead." Luke 9:22, "The Son of Man must suffer many terrible things. He will be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law. He will be killed, but on the third day, he'll be raised from the dead." And finally, John 2, he says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." In each account of Jesus' life, he states how he'll die and return 3 days later. And if you want to right now, you can skip out of this video, find Stafford's message from Easter, and you can hear how that promise turned out. How well he followed through with that. We see Jesus all throughout his time on earth choose his words very carefully, as he knew that the weight that they carried. The Sermon on the Mount itself is a really clear example to the power Jesus had in what he said. So if you made it to the end of this message, and you're someone who is on the fence about this, who Jesus is, because someone who claimed to know him hurt you in some way, or some careless word or action caused you to have serious doubts in who Jesus said he is, I want you to know that I'm sorry, that my heart really does break for you. We know we're not perfect, and we're not going to get it right all the time, but that doesn't excuse the pain that you feel, and it's not your fault. This is my email. We'll put it somewhere right here. We'll leave it up there for a little while because my name is weird to spell, but since I moved to Morden, I've gotten the chance to tell a lot of you who might know me the story of how I realized my call to ministry. I talked about a youth leader I had when I was 14, and how he was in his late 40s. He wasn't the most objectively coolest guy in the world. He wasn't the most energetic. He wasn't the loudest. He just cared about me. He just cared about us. A lot of my personality and how I think through things, I think is largely thanks to him and the small handful of other significant adult leaders I had in my life at that time. I wanted to grow up and become just like him, essentially. I wanted to be someone who helped others, particularly teenagers, know that Jesus had a place for them in his kingdom. The part of the story I don't often share is that a couple of years later, this guy who is a single dad, met a woman, and shortly after they met, she moved in with him, and then a few months after that, without telling me, he moved to a town over. I just turned 25 last week, so that makes it about 10 years since I've last talked to him. In my case, this relationship breakdown led me to ask what I could have done different. Could I have maybe done something to make him stick around? Was there something that I did or said that made him not want to tell me he was leaving or to say goodbye? Did I think that I was a 9 in this guy's life when I was actually really a 4? It led to a fear of abandonment and a habit of keeping people at arm's reach because I didn't want to let someone in, only to have them leave again without much explanation. It also affected my relationship with God. It made me suspicious of how someone like him, who I believe to be an incredible example of a man whose life is dramatically changed because of how Jesus worked in his life, could walk away from it all so quickly. As Christians, our words and our actions have our utmost importance because we're called to be people who use them to point people to Christ. If you're someone who's struggling with this stuff because of hurt that's caused by someone who claimed to be a Christian, I can't magically take that pain away, but I want to hear your story. Jesus was clear that the vows that we make should not be taken lightly. So that makes me that much more excited about the vow that he's made to us when he died on the cross to take away our sins, just because he loved us so much that he wanted to spend eternity with us. While I do want you to hear that we need to be more careful with our words and the promises we make, I hope that you find joy in the promise that Jesus made to us. How would our church change if we lived this out? What if we had full trust in each other because we all knew when someone said something, they meant it? When we go to work, our bosses can trust that we'll get done what we say we will. We won't promise to deliver what we're unable to. People can have maybe whatever opinion they want on God or religion or anything like that, but no one will be able to say that the people of Morton Alliance Church are dishonest or unreliable. By keeping our word, we have nothing to lose but a whole city to gain for Christ's sake. No matter where we've been or what we've done, Jesus vows to love you forever.